Okay, here's an interesting one for you. United States President Donald Trump announced a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, except for China, and that was effective immediately. Trump says he will be raising tariffs on Beijing to 125%, as accusing them of being disrespectful. Ultimately, they retaliated. Of course, China had slapped the United States with 84% tariffs in retaliation to Trump's initial announcement then to raise tariffs on that country. Now, the president of the U.S. claims to have received calls from over 75 countries to negotiate a solution, now announcing a 10% tariff in the interim for this 90-day period. Let's unpack this a little bit more because it can get a little bit confusing. Professor David Monyae is the director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Professor, thank you so much for the time. We're going to discuss the South Africa impact in just a short while, but I wanted to just start right at the top here. If one was to quote the more popular book that relates to Donald Trump, The Art of the Deal, one could ask the question whether he says there's a lot of negotiating going on. Is this really the art of the deal?
It's part of his plan, but it's quite misplaced. But this is the man for the last 40 years has been thinking of doing precisely what's going on now. But it has brought a lot of confusion on the market. And having done that and pause, it has weakened his hand greatly. However, the tension with China has a huge implication, given the fact that these two countries are a global economy number 1 and 2. And it has huge implication for the entire system that we know, on globalization, on issues of rules, WTO, the G20. So we are up for a rocky 4 years of his rule.
Does this prove that his fight is actually with China, as opposed to the rest of the world? We don't know how the rest of the world got involved in all of this, including South Africa, of course, but that his war and his fight has always been against his adversary, the world number 2 economy, China.
China is number 1, but I mean, if you look, it has gone beyond China. In the first his first administration of Trump, I mean, it was just China. Now it has gone beyond China. EU, domestically, I mean, the vendetta he has with all the cases and humiliation he suffered throughout the campaign. And the man is rolling in a manner that has a huge implication on all our economies, particularly on the African continent.
Who wins off the back of something like this, where you have these tariffs on, you have them off, you have them on again, you have them off? Who's going to ultimately win in a case like this?
It's a lose-lose. And as you know, markets do not like uncertainty. And what he has been doing is to inject that. And markets are going in a zigzag on an hourly basis. And that's not the way of managing economy. And it also weakens his allies in whatever kind of a trade war he wants to do with China. So what we're having, it's a world in which US is isolating itself, and you have Europe and China and all of us among the BRICS as well as the global south, still believing in globalization, believing that there's certain rules that need to govern trade. However, Trump is all to dismantle all what we know.
I know you're not necessarily a market analyst or market commentator per se, but what would you make of him having posted first that it would be the right time to ultimately buy shares in DJT, which is ultimately his company that is then listed as well on the US stock exchange, and then a couple of hours later announcing that pause in these tariffs? Would you think that perhaps is a little bit suspicious at the very least?
Oh, indeed. It is in his nature. He has been doing this for a while. But in a real world, post his presidency, I think the man might go to prison. There are so many cases that one can build, but that remains a U.S. issue. I think our major concern is that what do we do, given the fact that our own goods will be affected? Are we diversifying our own trade? Who are we talking to?
Yep.
Are we strengthening the African market? Those are core questions that Pretoria should be preoccupied with.
And I think let's go straight into that then, because at this point then it is going to be about diversifying and understanding that there's a lot we can no longer give to the United States then, because they just might not take it, or it might be tariffed very highly then. Can we find substitute markets, you feel, in this tariff era of Donald Trump?
It takes time to get alternative markets, but nonetheless, we have such a dynamic continent with 1.3 billion and ongoing African free trade is on. It's a question of building on what we have already, but I think we need to ensure that we have our own goods being competitive on the market, expand where we have trade, particularly in China, and expanding to new areas, your Kazakhstan, your Philippines, and going to Latin America, but more importantly, rely on our own region as well as the continent.
Yeah, and one wonders, of course, with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement still trying to kind of gather steam and build up in any way, whether we'd be able to get things done. But as you said, things do certainly take time. Is China the right place for us to be placing our bets on then as a country? They've ultimately invested in Africa, invested even in South Africa, and they play the long game, as it were. Is that the place that we should then be looking amongst all the other options as a big part for a lot of the output we would like?
Yeah, at the moment, it remains the only game in town. Everyone else is also going to China. But the lessons we've learned is not to put all our eggs in one basket. I think we need to also expand into Japan, in other Asian markets, and Latin America. I think we have your G7 countries. Europe still an important market for us. However, China is an important market. But the question is, what kind of goods do we have? Are they competitive? Are we turning around the raw materials that we continue selling into finished goods so that they're competitive, and ensure that the Chinese also invest on our markets? New cars, I think they need to buy more for our products, ensure that the leather seats come from here, the tires, and a number of things that gets into a car. So these are kind of issues that need to be handled at government level.
Is this about to weaken the stance of the US in the global sphere, whether it be in trade, whether it be in peacekeeping, whether it be in technological advancements, trade, manufacturing, etc.? Does all of this just weaken how the rest of the world sees them, isolates them, and the rest of the world then bandies together and could ultimately make the US a bit of a weaker country?
In the long run, indeed, the US is declining, and all people all over the world are seeing that. And as we know, capitalism thrives on trust. I think Donald Trump, prior Donald Trump, there has been chipping on human rights with what we see in the Middle East. And there's that trust deficit that is expanding to all other sectors. So in the long run, I think it's not good for the United States, but we have to live in this world, and therefore I think there is something we can do as Africans, as Global South, to ensure that we put systems in place in which our goods, our own interaction with the world is also to our advantage.
It's going to require a lot of outlay, though, isn't it?
Indeed, we need the best brains in government. We need a lot of thinking in terms of policy, but more importantly, we also need infrastructure. We need skills in our universities, research hubs. We need at school level. I think we need to think innovatively to ensure that we're competitive in an ever-changing world order.
Remaining competitive means also staying up to date with those technological advancements, which includes AI and the like. There's so much that ultimately everyone needs to look out for. This is clearly a developing story, Professor. So we might speak to you again very soon, but really appreciate your time this morning here on the AM Report. Dr. David Monyae, the Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg.